Welcome to the Staying Free podcast. This podcast seeks to give a voice to real people around the world who are attempting to stay free, stay sovereign, and stay sane in a world which is changing faster than ever. In this episode, I talk with Selfbankt. Now, Selfbankt is someone that I've followed for quite a while, and originally when I asked him to come on the podcast, it was to talk about Bitcoin, and I wanted to have a conversation about Bitcoin. And, I try to, just every now and again kind of pepper in someone to talk about Bitcoin because it's something that I think is really crucial. And although I don't want this to be a Bitcoin podcast, I don't want it to just be all about that topic, I do feel that Bitcoin plays a really important and crucial role. So, I think it's important to kind of have these conversations at least on a semi-regular basis. But around the time I reached out to Selfbankt, it also came to my attention that, he is working in the NHS and is one of the NHS 100K who is up for the sack, basically because of the new vaccine mandate that's coming in. So we actually ended up touching on Bitcoin, and we did talk about that, and it kind of threads through the conversation. But we also talked quite extensively about the NHS mandate and also just the kind of spiritual impact that that's having. Obviously we talked specifically about Selfbankt and how it affects him, but also just people on a wider basis, people who are working in that industry, and the kind of journey that the individual has to go through when you're making a decision like this, specifically, whether to keep your job or whether to stick with your principles, essentially. The people are going through this process of having to make a decision between these two things, and that really has a spiritual impact. And it can kind of go one of two ways, essentially. And this is something that we definitely go quite deeply into in the conversation itself. So I really hope you enjoy this one. I'm trying something a bit different with the intro today, rather than just doing something more scripted, just letting it flow a little bit more. So please let me know if you prefer this format, because for me it feels a little bit more natural, and I might just stick to this in the future. So as always, I hope you enjoy the episode, and if you have any feedback or suggestions, feel free to reach out on Twitter. Selfbankt, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. I've actually been following you for ages on Twitter, long before any of this was going on. I always loved the Bitcoin content you were producing, and I think you were probably one of the people who pushed me more onto the maxi side. So thanks for that, and welcome.
Pleasure. That's great to hear, man. It's awesome to hear sort of retrospectively that you've been an influence on people. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I was just, a lone shit poster, and you don't really know your reach or your impact and things. So it's really nice for people to kind of mirror that back to you and to reflect that back at some point. That's great.
Yeah, so I mean, that was my kind of introduction to you, was as another kind of UK Bitcoiner. But now I've recently learned that you also kind of work for the NHS and are one of the NHS 100K who is kind of facing the sack based on not getting the jab. So I guess maybe let's start there, because that's kind of a really pressing issue right now. Can you just kind of go into where you're up to with that and what your thoughts are generally surrounding it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really big thing, and I've had quite an emotional day. I spoke to the hospital director today, which is a conversation that's been looming for some time. I'm a consultant anaesthetist. I've been practicing I've been qualified for about 6 years. The training before that is around sort of 12 to 15 years or so. So it's quite a long process to get where I am. But this could be the last 2 or 3 months of my career in this country. And I had a pretty big conversation with the hospital director today just about mandatory vaccination and my stance on it, which is still something that I am yet to really confirm, because it hasn't actually kind of happened yet. But I'm really having to dig deep to work out what my views are and whether or not I'm prepared to stand by them. But essentially, I really think that people do need to make a stand and they do need to draw a line. And I think I've kind of reached my line with this. I'm a father of a young boy, and I do fear that if people don't make a stand on this, then they're going to be coming for the teachers and other employees very soon, and they're going to be vaccinating our children, and that'll include my 4-year-old boy really very imminently. And I can't be complicit or compliant with a system and vaccine policies whose kind of trajectory, I believe, is likely to harm the health and the freedoms of my children.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like you're in. There's kind of two things that are happening in parallel. One is that you obviously want to protect your son. Is it son you said you had?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
He was just at the door just to. and just a few moments ago.
Okay. Oh, that's who that was. Okay. So yeah, on one hand, you obviously want to protect your son, and that means wanting to have secure employment and needing to be financially secure, etc. But on the other hand, part of protecting your loved ones is not kind of allowing some things to happen, to kind of being able to stand in the way of things like tyranny, and that is it's much less of an obvious thing, right? Like it's not so obvious as just saying, okay, do I or don't I have a paycheck? Like, you are one person amongst many, and you're in this kind of sea of essentially resistance, and it's very hard to tell exactly how much your independent contribution is going to make by holding the line on this. But I can imagine that's a really, really difficult situation to be in, where you're kind of, you've got these two somewhat contradictory incentives playing at the same time. And obviously it's easy for someone like me, and I know that there'll be a lot of people who will kind of listen to this who will say, oh, well, hold the line, you have to do it until the end. And I obviously wish that for everyone, but at the same time I totally understand that this is a very difficult thing for those people going through it.
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, it's about sort of trying to break the trajectory that I think could very well end up with kind of childhood sort of mass vaccination in this country. But it's also about I don't want the vaccine really myself,
This section of the conversation has been censored in order to meet the community guidelines. For the full uncensored version of this conversation, please check the description for links to censorship-free platforms.
I'm reasonably fit. I'm in my early kind of 40s. I'm quite responsible about my health. I quit drinking a couple of weeks ago, and already I've seen a big sort of transformation there. But I just couldn't continue to drink during this next kind of few months. So the mental kind of pressure that I'm increasingly feeling I'm under means I've really got to be my best kind of self at the moment, and I've got to think very sort of clearly. And so in a way, it does kind of force you to get your shit together. But and so I don't want it myself. I don't want it for my family in the future. And I wouldn't be in the position, I think, where I had any sort of choice about it if I hadn't have been in Bitcoin for a few years, which genuinely, I think, now gives me the kind of optionality where I can make a moral stand, and I can take a risk, and I can, not have the guarantee of the kind of income that I've got at the moment. Although everyone, I'm sure, knows that when you get into a salaried job, your expenditure, as kind of Dickens, I think, sort of said, it just goes up to what your income is, So it's going to be painful. It's going to be a big sacrifice, and it's going to be a massive disruption in one way or another. But everything's on the table really now about what my plans are. I'm going to be looking for medical exemption options. I'm going to be, luckily, where I am, which is on the border of sort of England and Wales, there's the possibility of working over in the Welsh kind of healthcare system, at least for a time. I don't know how long it'll last, but they're not enforcing kind of vax mandates there. And so Scotland's the same. So it's really just England.
Interesting. I'm surprised about that, because they're the ones who have got the vax passports and everything.
Yeah, it's pretty weird. I mean, I think, and so Wales has been a pretty cut sort of nation, on this for the past couple of years. and they're normally very sort of compliant. But I think their health care system has been in crisis, and probably in sort of more crisis than the English one as well. And I think that they just realized that they can't take the hit, they can't take the loss. But I don't know, and I'd be surprised if that was to last all that long. But there might be the option that I could cross the border and get some work. I've already been exploring that. But I'm also thinking about other countries entirely. And I'm very tempted to take a trip with the family over to Central America and explore a few options there, and to go to Mexico, to go to El Salvador, and think about maybe even completely changing careers. Look for a niche in something else. Or I don't know. At the moment, everything's on the table. It's there's a lot of uncertainty, and it is quite terrifying. But at the same time, things are also, my thinking's quite clear, and I'm beginning to see the world kind of for what it is, as painful and as hard to deal with. I don't know. I've never really felt like this, but I'm alive, you know. I can feel all the stress of being alive, and it is terrifying and exhilarating at the same time.
Yeah, I actually really feel what you're saying there. I've kind of felt similar myself. It's almost like when you have so much taken away from you, when so many options taken away from you, it kind of funnels your focus into one key area. And when you really feel like, your actual scope of what you can do is just narrowed so much, it's almost like, okay, well, that's fine. All that's fallen away, and all I can do now is focus on this kind of remaining area. Like what can I do from here type thing. And also it's really kind of testing what we're about, right? It's like, what am I about? Like, what do I care about in this world? Like personally for me, my own journey is kind of like, I've come to this point where it's like, okay, my life I've never had to make huge sacrifices in my life. I've never had to turn down a lot of money. I've never had to, leave my country or do any of this. It's always been relatively easy to get by. But now the situation is kind of like, how much do I care about this thing? How much am I willing to give up? And I think there's a part of that. There's a part of that kind of journey of personal sacrifice, which actually does bring you alive, even though you think it would be the opposite, and you would think, oh, well, I'm just going to feel awful all the time, I'm going to be sad, I'm going to be depressed. I've actually spoken to a lot of people in this community who have said that their kind of anxiety or depression has actually gone away rather than heightened, because it's like, well, now my focus, I've got a goal, like I've got a purpose. I know what I'm about. I'm being challenged, and this is a challenge, and I've just got to do the next thing to try to get by. And I think a lot of us are feeling that at the moment.
Yeah, completely. I mean, and so the anticipation over the decisions has been the worst thing, and the impending nature of it in my mind, the fact that I am going to have to make a decision, I am going to have those conversations with work, has been quite kind of paralyzing. And I think that as it's coming into focus, it's causing me to ask questions of myself and to define what my values are. And I also feel that if I was to ignore my instincts and all the learning and the research I've done about the problems and all the objections that I have with the vaccine, from the molecular to the epidemiological, the moral, the kind of philosophical, the legal and the political objections and economic kind of objections that I have to it, and if I was just to continue in my fairly mundane work at the moment, doing what I'm doing, I just don't feel I'm going to be doing myself a disservice. I'm not going to be self-actualizing in any way. I'm going to be just accepting the comfortable route against my moral kind of better judgment. And that could kill me, to accept that. I think I'm better than that. I think this could be an opportunity for growth. I think the job I'm in, I'm proud of, and when we do great work, and my colleagues are excellent. But I have worried about doing that for the rest of my life. And so that's more scary than anything else. the idea that I could be doing just that one job for the next 20, 30 years. Jesus, now that's scary. But I mean, I've had the opportunity to be a bit of an entrepreneur in the past. I sold a bit of Bitcoin in 2017, and I started this little kind of restaurant. And I should never have sold a fucking Bitcoin, of course, but it was a fun little business project, and I've always had a bit of an itch to start something. And so within the Bitcoin space, and so 4 or 5, and so friends, we got together and remotely came up with this kind of 21ism.com, which is a Bitcoin art collective. We've been kind of featuring artists in different kind of categories for about a year. And it's great to start new projects, and I love that creative kind of energy and the kind of dynamism that comes with it. And I'd love to be involved with a lot more of that. And of course, if I'm not working, and so 8 till 5 as a mortgage slave, then I might have more time for the kind of things that set my mind on fire. And so Bitcoin is clearly one of those things. It has been for a few years. I've just been obsessed by it. I'd love to start something more related to that, either locally or, from what I'm hearing, that there's definitely a gap in terms of educational sort of Bitcoin spaces within countries like El Salvador. People have the opportunity to use it, but they don't necessarily know how. So I don't know. I think there's room. There's room in the space for somebody to come in with a little bit of funds and a lot of energy and some passion and to build things now. And I'd love to be part of that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, just to go back to one of the things you were saying at the beginning there was you mentioned the word self-actualization. And, it almost is like, in order to be self-actualized, do you just kind of continue to work a job that you might be really good at, etc.? Or in order to become self-actualized, is it about following, what you're about and following through with your kind of conviction and stuff? And I actually think that I've understood a bit more about being self-actualized recently, in that, what it's actually about is like you have your fundamental principles and you have to kind of follow them, even when sometimes that it seems like a step backward. It's not a step backwards in the context that you're essentially kind of following through with your conviction and following through with your principles, right? Like you're actually kind of standing by them and stuff. So, like you said, I guess my belief is normally that if you do well in one profession, normally you tend to be pretty capable in another. Like if you're capable of having one good career, you're probably capable of doing that again. It's pretty unlikely you're gonna be like, oh well, I can't do anything else. And like you said, you obviously have a real kind of passion for Bitcoin and stuff. So and you might find down the line like that that ended up being your what this was about for you. It might be your kind of crowning moment. One day maybe you'll look back and go, hey, like working in the NHS wasn't what I was meant to do for the rest of my life. I was meant to work in Bitcoin, and I needed a bit of a push to get there. And obviously, sometimes you wish that it's a bit easier rather than being dealt a hard hand. But hopefully down the line, it will be a positive transition.
Yeah, I think it's going to be slightly rocky, but it could be very exciting. I also feel that in the hospital that I'm in, it's not a very big hospital, but in a way, this is kind of my opportunity to rock the boat and to really speak my mind and to speak power to authority and to be open and communicate with my colleagues and the people I work with about my views. And I felt I've had to really hold back on that for quite some time now because of the the undercurrents. But I mean, if it's all going to be happening, then there's no point in me holding back anymore, and I don't have to worry about it. I can try and just be as clear and concise with people and as kind of genuine with them. I can explain things I can explain what's been going on in my head, and I can explain things and to how I see them. And I think that could be helpful for some other people. Because I find it hard that I find it hard to conceive that other people aren't going through this same kind of angst, that I feel I've been going through.
Yeah. Interestingly, like, it seems to be that there's quite a lot of Bitcoiners who are in your position. I've seen in the community that there's all the people who seem to be saying, oh, my job is up for kind of, I'm going to be getting the sack, etc. It seems to be a lot of Bitcoiners there. What's your experience kind of working within that industry? Like, how many of your colleagues who aren't kind of Bitcoiners, who aren't kind of, I guess, not to disparage kind of the normie world, but I guess, Bitcoiners tend to be very critical thinkers, people who think deeply about issues and principles, etc. What's the kind of general vibe from your colleagues, who aren't members of this community?
I mean, I think it's interesting. I think the Bitcoin kind of community has a problem with authority figures. Yeah, I think we all don't like being told what to do. So that's maybe part of the reason why there's been a tendency for Bitcoiners, plus the kind of critical thinking aspects, plus the ability to conceive of a conspiracy so obscene that it's just this huge, and so most people can't wrap their heads around the possibility something so big could be occurring. But I mean, the place I'm working in actually has quite a lot of kind of foreign workers in. The hospital I work in, it's a small kind of private hospital. And there's an awful lot of people from Hungary, from kind of Poland, from the Czech Republic, from kind of Bulgaria. So, these are countries that have had experiences of kind of communism within the lifetime of my colleagues. So they've kind of seen things that are quite similar to what's occurring right now in our Western democracies. And so quite a lot of them are awake to it. But I think if you're awake to it, that's sort of one thing, but you have to have the optionality to resist as well. And I think, part of the reason that people are unable to resist is because they don't have the financial security, because it's not been possible to develop the financial security or independence under a broken monetary system. But yeah, there are a number of consultants and sort of surgeons who I'm speaking to on a regular basis at work who are in exactly the same position as me. And they're finding it really hard. We're all finding it really hard. I mean, it's a lot of stress. And I can see that I suspect that they're going to be complying. That there's one guy who's up for retirement who's, he's fine. But I think the ones who, I think the others are probably going to, well, there's one guy who's going to have to comply. It's heartbreaking to see people hit that sort of wall. I don't know. It's hard.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, obviously, like I'm not in that position, and I mean, I would probably be. I'm sure that at some point they're gonna try to turn up the heat and figure out a way to try and get me to take the vaccine. But at least at this point, given everything that I do, and I work for myself, and I don't even live in the UK, and I work remotely and stuff, like I'm really at the end of that barrel. But sometimes I try to put myself in the position of those, of people like yourself who are in those jobs, or like you said, I mean, maybe not even people like yourselves, but people who have absolutely no optionality, who literally they have no choice but to take it. And I just feel really bad. It's just so unfortunate we're living in this world now where people have to potentially kind of just fold on such an important issue that for me, I would really struggle to live with that, because I'm someone, and I'm sure that you are as well, because you're a Bitcoiner, who, we try to live by principle, right? Like that's kind of part of being a Bitcoiner, is that you care about fairness, and you care about honesty, and you care about truth and all the rest of it, and doing the right thing. And when you're put in these situations where it's like, well, you've got to take this thing, otherwise you're not going to be able to feed your family or whatever it is. It's just such a it's such an awful situation. And going back to what we were saying before about it being something that we kind of is going to potentially end up defining us, I guess. In a strange way, this is almost like our war. Like we haven't had to go to war, we haven't had to go and necessarily die for our beliefs. However, we are in a way having a kind of gun put to our head of sorts, and our answer is, are we willing to kind of take a hit on this for our own for what we believe in type thing. It really is. It really is that kind of situation, and sometimes I have to think of that to try to keep myself sane. It's like, okay, I'm having to potentially at some point, okay, will I be able to earn the paycheck? Will I be able to go to the pub? Will I be able to go to the cinema? Whatever it is. But actually, I'm not having to face down like literal bullets. I'm not having to literally face down an enemy at war type thing. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it's any well, obviously it's less bad, right? But like for the soul, it still is painful. It's painful to do something that is not in line with your essence.
Yeah, no, I think it would be a little kind of mini death. To have to give in to your beliefs like that. And I'm worried about the impact that would have on my kind of psyche, I think. Because the reality is that, even though my salary is pretty good, it's still disappearing every month. I'm not getting any further because I have it. I think my stacking days are kind of behind me, or my, or the majority of them are. But so I don't know. Fuck it. I'm just going to jump. I think I'm going to jump.
Well, yeah. I mean, I won't tell you what you should do, but I know obviously everyone is kind of like rooting for people like you to just say, don't fold. But, I guess better advice is do what is actually the right thing. And, that means something different to different people, right? But as you said, like Bitcoin has given you optionality that most people don't have. And I find this kind of strange how the way that we always thought that Bitcoin would offer us freedom is quite different to how it's actually panned out. I always imagined, okay, Bitcoin's going to offer me freedom because, it's going to, you can transact with it without being censored, this, that, and the other. But actually now it's more like, has it given you some degree of financial liberation that means that you're able to take a hit like losing your job, for instance? And that actually seems to be the situation that a lot of Bitcoiners are in now. It's like, okay, I didn't want to use my Bitcoin, I didn't want to dig into that. I wanted to just leave it there or, hand it to my grandkids or whatever. Sure. But actually, I kind of think if this is as good a use for Bitcoin as any, right? Like if you have a stack.
It really is. I mean, obviously, I'll do everything to avoid kind of spending as much as I possibly can. I'll be cutting my own hair and I won't be buying any chairs, but and I'll be trying to refinance as much as possible over the next few months so that I'm not having to sort of sell as much. There's no point in me just paying anything off. I just need to keep everything on the minimum repayments, just ticking along for as long as possible. This has come along at really bad timing, of course, and so Plan B's kind of predictions for price right now were a little bit above where we are, which is another aspect of it. And so who knows where we'll be by April. I'm kind of, if things have moved a little bit by April, it'll be a much, much easier kind of transition, certainly.
Yeah. I think so. So on the Bitcoin note, because I'm not actually sure like how long you've been in Bitcoin. I think you've been in as long as I can remember, but I'm not sure whether I've got the kind of timescales wrong on that. So do you mind just going into your...
And so when were you in?
I mean, I got in 2016 and I didn't really get much involved in the kind of Twitter space until probably 2017, somewhere around there. But do you mind going into your kind of Bitcoin origin story a little bit?
Yeah. I've always been had a problem with authority, I guess, as we said earlier. I sort of left home quite early, and did a lot of traveling, and enjoyed university a great deal, and sort of dabbled in everything I possibly could get into. I was listening. I got quite interested in the kind of Linux community and the open source kind of ethos. That definitely kind of fired me up a lot. I bought my first apartment in London literally 3 or 4 months before the great kind of financial crash, and I saw the price of it drop by 40% within a few months of me buying it, and it was the biggest financial decision of my life. So I was like 30ish, and it was just pretty horrendous. The blood just kind of drained out of me, and I was a kind of ghost for a few months. It's pretty horrendous to see that, and so to actually experience that was quite scary, and it made me really question the structure of the financial world. And I got interested in the Occupy movement, and then I started listening to some kind of Rogan, and I wanted to buy some DMT. So I got onto the Silk Road in like 2014, and I got some Bitcoin, and I ended up just reading more about Bitcoin and getting into Bitcoin more, and never actually buying the DMT. And for about 6 months ago, so for about 6 months, I was, I was kind of buying, and then I sort of lost interest for a couple of years. And then in sort of 2017, again, of course, everyone got very excited. I kind of sold some Bitcoin at that stage. And as I said, I started this little restaurant in South Wales, which was really fun. But 2018 and 2019, I was watching things very closely. People who I'd been talking to in the Bitcoin kind of community were developing more of a presence in the space, and they switched me on to kind of maximalism in about 2018. That was when the educational sort of content started getting really good. There was a lot of great sort of podcasts that were coming out. There was some books like the Bitcoin Come Standard, and if you start to go down that rabbit hole, it just everything clicks. And it was in 2018 that I went to a Bitcoin event. I went to kind of Berlin in 2019 for the Lightning conference, and that just was really, really exciting. And it was phenomenal to kind of see the talent and the brains in the room, and to realize that these were some of the smartest people on the planet, I thought, really, and that they were very passionate and very hardworking on this project. And Lightning, really brought into focus for me the potential of Bitcoin. And after that, I just discovered Bitcoin on Twitter and said I'd do a meme a day. And that just escalated. I really enjoyed, and so visual representations of the ideas that I was learning about from the podcasts and the books and the articles and the videos that I was seeing. So I just, tried to crystallize the ideas and to get them into little images and to post them onto Twitter and to Instagram. And I'd done quite a bit of some social media for the restaurant before, so that was quite exciting. And I've always been quite a visual person. And then, 21ism, like I explained before, has been really phenomenal. And then kind of COVID happened, and I wrote a graphic story, which I got a Bitcoin. I got a kind of graphic artist to do the artwork for, and I kind of self-published, and I've been kind of selling that for Bitcoin for about a year or so now, which has been a really cool little project. And yeah, it's great to sell something when Bitcoin is $8,000, and then watch it go up to $69,000 and think, fucking hell, that was worth selling. You know, that was worth a little bit of entrepreneurial kind of drive. So yeah, I want to sell more kind of things for Bitcoin. I think it's a lot simpler than selling things for kind of fiat currencies. You know, dealing with being a registered kind of business, dealing with the tax man, dealing with your accountants and kind of company's house is a complete fucking ball ache. And I think that Bitcoin allows us to really go global and to do it with a tiny amount of kind of friction compared to the legacy system.
Yeah, it's amazing when you're in Bitcoin and you're sending sats to people over the Lightning Network to do stuff for you online, and suddenly it's just like it makes the kind of legacy financial system just feel so antiquated. It's amazing how quickly you just become accustomed to that. Yeah. Just to go back to something you were saying before, because I actually got into Bitcoin via the dark web as well, which I think a lot of people who were getting in around that time, I think probably 2016 was towards the end of that, and then it all became about, you know, the mad gains, right, in the 2017 kind of bull run. But going back to that, you said you didn't end up getting the DMT in the end. I'm a little bit curious to know about your kind of psychedelic journey, because what's your kind of thoughts around all that, or your kind of experience?
I mean, I'm looking forward to the opportunity to get more involved with that. I mean, I've at university I used to enjoy kind of clubbing, and I used to enjoy MDMA and that kind of stuff, and you know, recreational drugs were fun, and I did some kind of magic mushrooms a few times. And I went to Bali, where I proposed to my wife about, and so 5 years ago now, and did some magic mushrooms there as well, and that was fun. And then I've done them fairly recently again, but in a very small dose. But yeah, it's I think they can be very useful. I think they can be like cheaper than having some therapy. I would have loved to have had the opportunity to go to Peru and do an ayahuasca kind of ceremony. It's been something I've been wanting to do for a long, long time. It sounds pretty cathartic, potentially pretty scary, but yeah, I think you've got to face your demons. And I've certainly got a few of those, you know, in the closet still. But it's been very difficult. I mean, being a kind of father of a young boy and taking the steps into parenthood, a lot of the opportunities to indulge that curiosity, you know, they disappear.
Right. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I mean, I have a bit of a theory that, you know, people who have experimented with psychedelics seem to just be, I don't know, they seem to kind of recognize, and I don't know whether this is a selection bias, right? Like people who are critical thinkers tend to try psychedelics, or whether it's that people, you know, you try psychedelics and it turns you into more of a critical thinker. But I just get the impression that, you know, quite a lot of people who have done psychedelics, they seem to kind of like recognize that there's something more than just doing the day-to-day run-of-the-mill thing, and, you know, bringing this back to the kind of you know, for instance, like the vaccine passports and everything. It's almost like the people who are thinking deeply about this issues and who are willing to suffer for this cause, you know, people like you or I, tend to have, you know, maybe had these experiences that are much more esoteric, and have kind of connected with a bit of a different kind of world, in a sense, you know, where you're more able then, coming out of the other side of it, to go, well, you know, it's not just all about what's in front of us, and, you know, there is something deeper, and you know, there's something more than the material world. And I think that sometimes translates into having more of a conviction to follow through on your kind of you know, philosophy, you know, and to kind of try to live authentically, etc. I don't know if you'd agree with that.
Yeah, I think it gives you, it gives people the opportunity to look behind the curtain a bit. You see the old man behind the curtain kind of pulling the levers, like in The Wizard of Oz. You realize that there's a reality behind reality, like in the kind of Plato's cave sort of analogy. And you realize the world is a very energetic place. It's an energy-based world. And a lot of these things are, our impact on them is fairly irrelevant. It's like deep kind of physics. It's just kind of quantum physical sort of reality sort of behind us, behind humanity's fairly recent impact on, and so on the planet. I think you do start to question things a bit more, and perhaps that does allow you to lift the veil on things like what's going on right now with COVID and what has been going on for 50 years with the kind of fiat monetary system. I also think the fact that kind of Bitcoin is an energy-based kind of money is like slightly goes into that. I mean, Bitcoin is this, this kind of cyborg, viral, kind of parasitic kind of idea that's just spreading like a mycelium around people's brains and across computer networks around the world. I mean, it's pretty fucking trippy, really, just to try and get your head around that.
Yeah, it really is. And I suppose that you've read Brandon Quittem, right?
Yeah.
Like he talks about some of these ideas.
Yeah,
it is very interesting to think about. It's almost like I'm not one of these people who subscribes much to the whole, Bitcoin is a living being thing. I think for me, that's just like pushing the boat out too far, but it does kind of have incentive structures which cause it to behave in a way, through the incentive structures of individual self-interest. It kind of propagates its way in the world, akin to a kind of, a being of its own right that we can't necessarily kind of predict or control, and it has a way of kind of, disseminating itself into the world. So I do have a lot of respect for those kind of ideas, although I stop short of the whole Bitcoin is a living being argument.
But it's interesting the way that the properties of Bitcoin begin to manifest in Bitcoiners after some time. They all seem to start to take more personal responsibility, to drop away the kind of fiat kind of culture, and really focus on more fundamental aspects of their lives. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, and I think I really like Eric Kaysen. I think he's just like one of the most smart people in the space, and one of the things that he often talks about is the kind of messianic nature of Bitcoin.
Yeah.
It's almost as if this thing's come into the world. And, I know that some of these ideas, there's going to be people switching off a little bit right now, because I know that my kind of audience is not necessarily Bitcoiners. Like there's some Bitcoiners, but, this might be getting a bit too esoteric for someone who's either new or isn't in Bitcoin. But it does seem to have this way of transforming the individual, and not just the individual, but the society at large, through these kind of incentive structures where it just kind of has bursted into the world, and it just fixes so many things. And it basically says, if you try to be evil in the face of this thing, you're going to have a reckoning come to you. It's almost just like this kind of this system of reintroducing kind of economic consequence to people's decisions, makes them turns them into better people, in a sense. Like, you have to make better decisions. It kind of obliterates fiat culture, which I now look at almost like a kind of evil. And I know that these terms might seem a little bit extreme to say words like evil, but sometimes I'm looking at fiat culture and just how kind of wasteful it is, and how superfluous it is to human requirement, and so it just doesn't feel right to me. And then you have this thing, Bitcoin, that comes in, and it makes people, kind of like long-term time horizon thinkers, and it makes people kind of more more kind of stoic in a sense, but also, more frugal, like more conservational, it just, it really has changed so much, like in my life. And I know a lot of other Bitcoiners feel the same way. And, I mean, I guess this has just turned into a bit of a kind of Bitcoin rant. I'm not sure what my point was.
No, it's all good. Yeah. I mean, I think if you don't, and so if we didn't have it, then Western culture would just continue to kind of denigrate itself. And, it's turning into some weird fucking kind of mutant now, which is just clearly not going to have much of a future. It seems to be kind of eating itself, Yeah. I think that this kind of sound money culture, in a way, is a return to more traditional values, and values that have underpinned humanity's sort of march of progress in the past when they had a sound money. It's only in the last kind of 50 years that money's become just kind of meaningless, and the incentive structures have become so broken that our culture has morphed into something so obscene, and it would be great to just try to strip all that back and to, I don't know. I just want to, be self-sufficient and have a homestead and maybe, and to raise some animals and a child and a family and start to harness some renewable energy and, do that whole, that kind of citadel thing and that kind of permaculture thing. And maybe that's the stage I'm in my life, but I think it's slightly accelerated by my interest in Bitcoin and the values of Bitcoin.
Yeah. And I'm darting around a little bit here, but I know before you mentioned that you were thinking about potentially moving to South America or to some other place, if you end up losing your job. Like, can you just, I guess, go into your thoughts there a little bit, like what you're thinking as a potential alternative? I know that you've not necessarily thought it right through to the finer details yet, but just what are your thoughts around that? Because I know that a lot of people are doing that right now.
Yeah. Well, I think England and the UK have been really quite good until now. But there was the front page of the Mail on Sunday in Scotland yesterday was information was the front headline was from the kind of virus advisor or the vaccine advisor to the Scottish government, and it said that all children over 5 should be vaccinated to keep the schools going. So I think that things are changing in the UK, and I think there's very few places in the world that that are resisting this. The main areas that, in my mind, I can see are Central and South America, the Balkans, as in Croatia, Montenegro, Serbia, kind of Bosnia, and Albania.
I'd probably say Poland as well might be in that category. They seem to be pretty good these days.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Also, into parts of Africa, particularly South Africa, I think looks interesting right now. And so my wife is Nigerian, a kind of British Nigerian. So I've never had the opportunity to go out to Nigeria, but that could be something that we explore as well. I mean, certainly Bitcoin growth within Nigeria is huge. I know that Jack Dorsey's been spending a lot. He's spent a lot of time out there. He's putting a lot of kind of energy into growing Bitcoin infrastructure within Africa, which I think very much could be huge. But of all countries in Africa, maybe South Africa could be interesting. Although Kenya's pretty cool as well. I mean, I'm starting to think about things like which countries have the cheapest electricity rates and have some stable government. Because I've done a bit of mining over the past 18 months and it's turned out quite well. And I'd like to increase the amount of that I do. It's definitely a good business plan.
Well, I have a great tip for you here.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, this is hot off the press. So,
Oh yeah.
So here in Merida, they have. So I'm in Merida, which is in Yucatan in Mexico, and
Yes.
here they have free. I think this might be the only place in the world that I've seen this. They have free electricity sockets around the streets because apparently the electricity is so cheap here. So you can just charge your phone. You can go into the parks and stuff, and they just have these sockets. To which my friend said to me when we found out about this, he was just like, we should just hook up a miner, right? Like, I'm assuming that probably it isn't going to last long, but I think that there might be a temporary arbitrage opportunity to come and plug in a few miners out here and just get free mining.
That's interesting. I mean, if electricity is that cheap that they're able to have these kind of free plugs, I mean, maybe that's not the place to be plugging in, but if you were to get a space, Mexico might be a good place to site it. I hadn't thought about that. It's been interesting recently, like seeing the kind of Kazakhstan thing sort of develop, because Kazakhstan had a lot of quite cheap electricity, and that was the reason that a lot of the miners from China went there. But I think if you were to do a mining facility in a country that was more unstable or had kind of crime issues, you've got to really think about the security of the installation. But so mining can be really good. I think the return on investment that you get from mining is hard to match in any other business if you can get hold of the miners.
Yeah.
And so particularly at the moment, with the price not being where it should be and things like kind of Kazakhstan sort of dropping out, at least for the time being, means I think it's probably not a bad time to be getting into mining, or to be getting a lot more into it.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think if my job does go down, the main person I've got to convince is my wife, of course, although I keep planting seeds there. But we'd love to get a one-way flight to Cancun and then explore Mexico a little bit more. We've been there before, and then head down to El Salvador and kind of Guatemala and Costa Rica, but predominantly explore the potential for entrepreneurial business within El Salvador. And so at least kind of as things really stand at the moment.
Yeah. I mean, you've got quite a lot of Bitcoiners who are moving out there now. I think Max and Stacey have already got their citizenship.
Yeah,
it sounds like there's other people who's following. And I agree with what you're saying. In terms of there are just so much better opportunities out there. The West has kind of been living on not necessarily a lie, but just on kind of old news for a long time now. It's like, best quality of living, this, that, and the other. But actually, like, freedom in the West is at an all-time low, and it's getting lower. And you have other places that I just think are really strong places to live. And this is something that I've noticed as a difference between the kind of Bitcoin crowd and the non-Bitcoin crowd within the kind of freedom movement. That's a kind of umbrella for both groups, which is that the Bitcoiners are much more prepared and willing to move to a different place, whereas the non-Bitcoiners are a bit more kind of stay and fight. And I'm not kind of, I don't necessarily have strong feelings on either one. Obviously, I've taken more of the kind of, go where you're treated best, seek out freedom, seek out, like-minded people, etc. I fully respect the kind of stay and fight people. But at the same time, I do think that there's a place, there is something to be said for leaving and going to another place which allows you to have more freedom. And I'm not sure. I don't know necessarily exactly where that is, but I do think that the globe is gonna change. Like the kind of geographical boundaries that we're used to are gonna really change coming into this period, because just like with any big world event, you think of something like World War II. Afterwards, so many people just displaced. You have people living in different places all over the world who were, moving because of war. They were moving because of, seeking out more, seeking out political asylum and all the rest of it. And I think that with a something such as, COVID-19, just the nature of how governments are trying to strangle freedom, etc. I think it's inevitable that people are going to move to different places, and I don't necessarily think that that's a bad thing. I actually think it's good that people should shop around for freedom, because that brings a kind of more market force to this, which doesn't otherwise exist. If you just say, well, I'm going to stay and fight, okay, great, like that is good and it's noble, etc. But you're not necessarily voting with your wallet. There's something to be said, or kind of voting with your feet almost. It's like, I'm not going to be a taxpayer here anymore. I'm going to go to this other place where I can live free. And I do think there's that there's an importance in that too. So I think both are important.
Yeah, I mean, I think the kind of cross-fertilization that could come out of people sort of migrating for freedom to developing world countries could be really interesting, that could be really exciting to be involved with. And when you talk about people wanting to kind of stay and fight, yes, I respect that too, but who really is kind of fighting here? And how are they fighting? I mean, the fighting is, well, you don't want to fight with, the government on the street. You don't want to fight with the man with the kind of baton and the kind of pepper spray. That fighting's not going to be getting us. That's not going to be helping, I don't think. It might be fun for a bit, but I don't think that's the answer. Whereas you can fight in an online space. I mean, and so you're a good example of this. I mean, I thought that you were UK based. I thought that a lot of your discussions are about what's happening in the UK, but you're not even in the UK. But you're still having an impact on people here. So you're still kind of fighting here, even though you're kind of living remotely. So, I mean, because of the global internet world that we're in, I mean, you don't really need to be in the country that that you want to do the fighting in.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm glad that you brought that up, because actually I think that what it's about, if I was to really try to define it, is like, where is your, what's the most impact that you can have, or where's your kind of best effort spent? And, because another part of this is, for instance, in Mexico at the moment, you have, and not just Mexico, I know this is happening in other parts of Central and South America. People are kind of buying land, people are kind of coming together in communities, and they're really kind of getting off the grid and becoming more sovereign. And your propensity to do that is much, much greater somewhere like here than it is in the UK. Yeah. So, sometimes it's like, well, what's the best, what's the highest degree of change that I can make? And that's not necessarily always in your home country. So like you said, you can care about it and really want things to change, etc. But also, I think that probably the most important thing is that we all do whatever action is necessary to try to get more free and more sovereign and come together within our kind of community and to advocate for our values. And that doesn't necessarily mean, staying and fighting. It can for some people, and like I said, I fully respect that. I fully respect that kind of sentiment, but I also do think that shopping around for your freedom is an important part to play. It's kind of like, if you go to a restaurant and you're being treated really bad, I mean, you can sit there and you can argue with them all day and you can say, no, I want this, go and cook it again, all the rest of it. Or you can just say, I'm just going to go to another restaurant that's going to treat me well. Right, like I know that it's maybe a little bit oversimplified, because you would say, oh well, this is my home country, I'm not going to just let it go, etc. But for me, who's a kind of libertarian, I don't really believe in these nationalistic kind of ideas anyway. I just kind of think, if you can have freedom somewhere else that's not your home country, there's sometimes that's a really good opportunity, and that's actually going to move us into the future faster potentially.
Yeah, I mean, it's the thesis of the kind of sovereign individual. We have the ability to kind of shop around, and it used to be purely about the economic sort of aspects of what you were able to earn, perhaps. But now it seems to be about kind of freedom. So if I want to shop around for freedom, as I say, those are the areas that I'm looking at. But also being in the UK, like what I'd really like to do, I can't do in this country. There's a lot of paperwork. It's a real kind of nanny state. Things move very slowly. There's a lot of bureaucracy. It's a great country in a lot of ways. But I mean, for instance, I was wanting to maybe look at getting some land with some hydro potential for mining, and looking more into that in this country. You have to, if you have a stream or a kind of river, and you want to just, you can't really put anything on the river itself. If you wanted to take any water out and put it through a little kind of mini kind of hydro installation with a bit of concrete and this kind of spiral structure, even though the water's going out and so 6 feet kind of later is going directly back into the river, you have to pay per, and so per liter that kind of comes out, you have to pay for all the water that you remove from the river, even though you're putting it kind of directly in, and you have to get kind of permission from the local council for this sort of water extraction stuff. I mean, it's just impossible to, if you were to buy a huge amount of land that had a river coming through it, you wouldn't be able to monetize that for, a small amount of electricity production without going through a massively drawn out, very lengthy process of legislation with your local council. I don't know. Whereas I think maybe if you were to get a bit of land in, so somewhere in Central or South America, I think you can probably do that without anybody even knowing about it or caring about it.
Yeah, I think that's true. It does seem that it's easy to do those kinds of things here. I guess that it seems to be the trajectory, generally speaking, of a nation that as it gets richer, over a long enough period of time, it just introduces more and more laws, rules, regulations, and in the end, it actually becomes, it kind of becomes a victim of its own success in a sense. And I do think that in the UK, we've kind of like lost track of, what we're supposed to be about. It's like, well, it should be about, empowering people and, empowering the entrepreneurial spirit, etc. And I don't think that exists so much there now, whereas these things are still relatively easy in other places. I've got a friend who went over to Vietnam to start a kind of bed and breakfast type thing. And, he just said, like, I'd never be able to do this in the UK. I wouldn't possibly be able to do it. Everything would have to be, scrutinized on a kind of legal basis and this, that, and the other. And there would just be too much red tape to be able to do it. Whereas it's almost like, and I definitely got this feeling when I was out there that the American dream is very much alive in Vietnam, right? Like, not so much in a lot of places in the West, but over there, there's, huge... so many kind of small business owners and things, because it's just the barrier to entry is low. The red tape, it doesn't exist in many cases, and it kind of like creates a flourishing society.
Well, that sounds fun, doesn't it? That sounds so much fun to be in a place where you have the potential to turn ideas into reality. I'd love that opportunity again. Because it's feeling a bit like we've lost that here in an awful lot of ways.
Yeah, kind of stagnant.
Yeah, it's been kind of stagnant. I mean, I've had friends over the years who have emigrated to other countries, and you sometimes sort of think about what they've done, and you think maybe, you wish you'd done the same thing. And some of them went to Australia, so now I don't think that anymore. But maybe this is my opportunity for everything to come together. Everything that I wanted my future to be, I wanted my family and their future to be. It could be the future that I carve out over the next few years, and so starting in April. So it could be a whole new beginning, and it could be massively optimistic. And I think you've got to be optimistic, don't you? I mean, it's been such a difficult time kind of mentally and kind of spiritually for everyone. But the only way to live really is to be a rational optimist. So, I've got to make sure that I have my head together and my shit together, and I kind of tackle this kind of nexus of fuckery that's coming at me with the best acumen that I can.
Yeah, and I'm sure you will. I put out a kind of Twitter thread a few days ago, and it was all about being kind of willing to recognize the world has like fundamentally changed, and to not try to kind of cling on to it, but to actually just say, this world has gone, and we just need to now look towards the future. And I think that maybe that's the situation you're in. It's certainly the situation that I'm in, which is that you just need to say, for instance, for you, even if you said, okay, I'm just going to comply, I'm just going to go and get the vaccine, and I'm just going to kind of continue to try and live this, and it won't feel authentic, but I'll just do my best. Potentially you're going to kind of miss, a huge opportunity for growth and change. Yeah. And I think that's what a lot of people are thinking. It's like, if I try to cling to the old, whatever that means, it doesn't necessarily even, some people, it's not even necessarily about the vaccine or whatever, but it's like, if I try to kind of cling to the old ways, that I've been living, you're going to kind of miss this new world that's being created. And, obviously I do have my times of being more pessimistic, but I also, similar to you, feel quite alive and quite optimistic that something is in the making here. We're kind of building something. The fact that we're having this conversation right now, the fact that this community, it's almost like we're never more than 1 or 2 degrees of separation from someone else in the community who people know, sometimes even personally. And there's definitely a movement that has been created here, which is the first. Obviously, like, we've been part of the Bitcoin movement, and that's something else which is along similar lines, but now it's like this real unification of lots of different people who just care about these fundamental principles, who have just maybe been sitting quite quietly for a long time, and now have just said, you know what, it's time to actually stand up, it's time to speak up, it's time to get active. And so I really kind of wish you the best with everything. And I kind of hope, but also really strongly believe that something good will come out of this, and that hopefully there'll be a kind of new lease of life at the other end of it, and something really, really exciting. Because I know that, things that you've kind of been, I've been following you for a while, and you've definitely kind of inspired me, and I've learned a lot from you. So I think that you have a lot to offer, and, I really kind of wish you the best for whatever comes after April.
I really appreciate that. That's great. And so likewise with what you're doing, I think that your voice is really strong and really clear. And I think it's great timing. And I think it's connecting with a lot of people. And I'm sure it'll have a big impact. So well, hopefully I'll maybe come and sort of see you in Mexico in a few months' time, or in El Salvador.
I really hope so. I mean, people are kind of coming together, and things are happening out here. So definitely, if you come to Mexico, then let me know, and it'd be great to hang out. So just before I kind of sign this off, I just want to apologize to the listeners for the sound quality. It's not up to the usual standards, because as I mentioned to you, Selfbankt, before this conversation, I'm in a hotel room, which is probably the most echoey hotel room in the world. So I apologize, and I will try and do better in the next one. But thanks so much for coming on the podcast, and I'll leave you with any last words that you have and where people can find you, and then I'll let you sign it off.
I've really enjoyed this, and so thanks for the opportunity to talk. It's just great to talk with particularly kind of new people, and sort of realize that you've got so much in common with people who you've never had a chat with before. That's one of the great things about this community. I'm shitposting on Twitter most of the time at Selfbankt, so that's a good place to find me. Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Cheers.